Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth Voss, Editor-in-Chief of Disobedient Media, and I'm here with you once again to read you a couple of our articles. And one that had really good feedback a couple of days ago was the opinion piece I did on Sarkozy and his indictment for corruption as the Clinton cabal crumbles. But before I make that video, I would like to read you all a little bit of an older article titled, "In the Wake of Oxfam, Has Humanitarian Aid Become a Euphemism for Oppression?" And the reason I want to read that to you specifically is because it gives a lot of important background information for the Sarkozy opinion piece that I published a few days ago. So this is a bit of a longer article. It's really heavy material, so if you're not in the mood for that type of article, then just skip this one. But without too much further delay, I'll just get right into it. So I wrote, "The latest Oxfam sex abuse scandal does not exist in a vacuum. It is not the first time that aid groups have been accused of sexual misconduct towards the very people that the entities purport to protect, and without significant change, it will not be the last time such allegations emerge. The current debacle began with the revelation of sexual abuses by Oxfam's country director in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake devastated the island nation, and there's a lot of scandals have come out of the aftermath of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti for sure. The allegations eventually led to the expulsion and banning of Oxfam from Oxfam Great Britain specifically from the country. Reuters reports that Oxfam's former country director in Haiti, Roland van Houwermeiren, excuse me for murdering that word and phrasing, admitted to using prostitutes at his residence during a relief mission before resigning in 2011. CNN wrote that Oxfam had published an internal report that acknowledged that 3 staff members also physically threatened and intimidated a witness during an internal investigation into the issue. So the New York Times discussed Haiti's decision to ban Oxfam Great Britain from operating in the country, and discussed all of the scandals surrounding that. And the reason that this Oxfam scandal is important isn't just because the leader in Haiti of a charity was using prostitutes. It's also allegations that some of these prostitutes were underage, and it's also just one more scandal in a string of scandals that have happened in varieties of, various different countries, whether it's Chad or Haiti, where charities come in and they abuse the people that they are supposed to be helping. And that's why this Oxfam scandal is really important. And so when legacy media treats this particular scandal like it's the first time that this has happened, that is utterly ridiculous. And in this article, we go through some of the historical charitable scandals and show the way in which, this latest Oxfam issue is just yet another link in this chain of really awful history. So such abuses have proven all too pervasive over the preceding decades, with Disobedient Media's William Craddock breaking coverage of the Clintons' efforts on behalf of Laura Silsby. Craddock reported that Silsby's illegal attempt to traffic Haitian children in the aftermath of the same 2010 earthquake that became the setting for the Oxfam debacle, as well as the Clintons' apparent efforts to intercede on Silsby's behalf. Many other independent voices have also reported allegations of severe impropriety in the Clintons' conduct in Haiti, especially in reference to the infamous Clinton Foundation, of course. And there have been some really great local Haitian journalists that have reported on that. You have Charles Ortel doing a great job reporting on the financial corruption of the Clinton Foundation. So we're obviously not the only group that's pointed that out, that pointed to this problem. But in April last year, Disobedient Media also wrote regarding historical abuses tied to the United Nations, noting that the UN has faced accusations of sex crimes for decades. This is not new, ranging from rape and abuse of women and minors in war zones to participation in human trafficking, prostitution, and even production of child pornography involving senior UN officials and members of foreign governments. And that is not hyperbole. This is all what was reported, in legacy press years and decades ago. But it's just that what establishment media does is they treat every single scandal as completely separate and they treat it as if it exists in complete isolation and doesn't represent a trend. They never connect these historical events together to show you the actual context that exists. So, additionally, Disobedient Media described allegations of child and organ trafficking that emerged in the aftermath of disasters, including locations in Haiti, Chad, and the Balkans in the 90s, of course. This author's report on that matter ultimately queried if this was what was caught, what abuses are occurring that we do not catch. And in light of the latest series of abuse allegations with Oxfam, the unfortunate answer appears to be far too much. The question as to whether minors were also sexually abused by Oxfam staff remains open-ended, and Oxfam's 2011 report itself, their own admission, it indicates that none of the initial allegations concerning fraud, nepotism, or use of underage prostitutes was substantiated during the investigation, but it cannot be ruled out that any of the prostitutes were underage. So basically, they're refusing to answer yes or no to that issue. In all, 7 Oxfam employees were terminated in relation to the incident, and ABC News reported allegations that some of the prostitutes involved with Oxfam staff were minors. So you do have Legacy Press acknowledging that that was a question that was not answered. This is not the first time that a member of Oxfam would be swept up in a highly publicized sex abuse scandal. British press reports indicate that Carolyn Thomas, who became chair of Oxfam in 2016, previously served as an executive at BBC during the emergence of the Jimmy Savile sexual abuse fiasco that deeply tarnished the reputation of the BBC, and that was a huge, massive scandal in the UK. Some press reports imply that abuses perpetuated by Oxfam staff were much worse than what was officially documented in the now public 2011 report, citing the age of those involved as a particular concern. That abuses against minors cannot be confirmed or denied in this case is disconcerting, especially considering well-documented sex abuses of children in Haiti by United Nations peacekeepers and others, and that Haiti has just been the site of so much abuse, whether it's the introduction of cholera by the UN and the cholera epidemic that took thousands of lives in that country, or whether it's this child sex abuse that is rampant. You know, it seems to me that the aid in Haiti has done massive amounts of damage, worse than what they would have been able to achieve in helping the country. It's unbelievable. From the UN, as I said, the UN introduction of cholera, these are the groups that are supposed to help in the wake of this earthquake, and instead they cause thousands of deaths and sex abuses. It's ridiculous. Anyway, since the scandal's emergence, Oxfam has faced the cessation of financial support from thousands of individual donors and even public funds. The Associated Press reports that the British government suspended new funding for Oxfam's British affiliate and Oxfam Great Britain, which received £31.7 million, which is $43.8 million US dollars, from the government in the 12 months through March 31st, 2017, or about 8% of its revenue. So not only is that a really significant amount of funding from the UK taxpayers, that's also showing you that they have a lot of money at their disposal. If $43.8 million US dollars is 8% of its revenue, then they are operating with a lot of cash. So I think that raises questions about what they're using that money for and where it's coming from, in my humble opinion. But that's just my own thoughts on that. So Amira Malik Miller, who is a Swiss humanitarian aid worker, came forward in the wake of the Oxfam furor discussing abuses tied to Roland van Houwermeiren with Hard Talk. And so Houwermeiren, and I'm totally mispronouncing that name, I'm sure, but he was the one that is at the center of the Oxfam controversy. So basically what you have here is a Swiss humanitarian aid worker talking about scandals that had surrounded him before this latest abuse came to light. So she described witnessing abuses in Liberia in 2004, that's a long time ago, while working for a British charity called Merlin. So the charity is named Merlin, which is, I know in reading a few people tripped up on what I meant by that. So yeah, the charity titled Merlin, where Roland van Houwermeiren served as the country director, again in Liberia, just as he did later in Haiti with Oxfam. So despite Miller having lodged an official complaint with the charity, van Houwermeiren was able to gain employment with other aid groups before finally being exposed in relation to abuses in Haiti while working for Oxfam. And what she described was inappropriate sexual contact between people that the charity was supposed to be helping and these aid workers. And she lodged an official complaint, and basically nothing was done. So, this is definitely suggesting that in humanitarian aid work, there is a very problematic tolerance of abuse that is a cultural tolerance, I think, similar to the political culture of tolerance for abuses that sees millions of US congressional funds being used for settlements from sexual abuse allegations. So Although the current outrage and funding cuts may lead to an increased accountability for Oxfam specifically, it does nothing to address the larger problems posed by an amorphous industry of aid groups. If an ample supply of taxpayer funding continues to the general industry, absent any drastic transparency or accountability measures, the same abuses will inevitably continue ad infinitum. And the heart of the problem is that non-governmental organizations are by definition unaccountable to the public that funds them and impervious to those they serve, as humanitarian groups operate amongst devastated populations with near impunity. For peacekeepers and those affiliated with the United Nations, diplomatic immunity prevents the tiniest shred of accountability, even in cases of the most heinous sex crimes. That Oxfam and similar organizations receive sizable government funding and funds, while unaccountable to the public, represents an existential problem for all NGOs, charities, and humanitarian efforts. As the situation stands, a total lack of transparency creates an environment ripe for abuses of the worst kind. And in the article, on the left side of the page, I included a newspaper clipping from 1987 titled "UNICEF Man on Child Sex Charges." And I'm going to read that clipping to you because, I block quoted a little later on, but I really want you to understand how far back this goes. So this was a UNICEF case where basically child pornography was found to have been created in the basement of the UNICEF headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. So this was written by Alex Scott, and I will just read the entire clipping to you now. So they said, quote, "The director of the National Committee for the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, Mr. Joseph Verbeek, yesterday became the 14th person charged with offences involving what police suspect is an international child prostitution ring. Verbeek, age 63, was charged with indecency and incitement of debauchery against children, according to the public prosecutor's office here. The 14 arrests in Belgium, Holland, Britain, and France followed police raids on UNICEF's Brussels offices and the premises of the Research and Information Centre on Childhood and Sexuality. Amongst those held were a UNICEF volunteer worker, Michael Felu, who is alleged to have developed pornographic photographs in the agency's basement and to have kept computerized lists of customers. The Belgian authorities have suggested a link between the Brussels operation and the similar organizations in the US and Japan, as well as several other European countries involving children between 4 and 12. The government was highly embarrassed by the news that a former Justice Ministry official, Philippe Carpentier, was one of those arrested, together with a close associate, a top government official working on highly sensitive anti-terrorist legislation. So there you have your intelligence link to this scandal. The links established so far point to the Centre for Childhood and Sexuality and its branch offices in other European countries, including Switzerland and France. The centre was established 4 years ago. And that's the end of the quote. And in other reporting, you will find, on that specific scandal, you will find indications that they were actually trafficking children from North Africa and, actually abusing them and creating this pornography in the basement of the Brussels UNICEF building. So that is absolutely abhorrent. It's incredible that was exposed. That was all the way back in 1987. So this type of abuse was happening that far back. And it just keeps coming up and up again, whether it's in 2010 with Laura Silsby, whether it's in 2011 with the revelation of the Oxfam scandal, whether it's in Chad with Zoe Zark. It just goes on and on and on. And it shows us that there is an endemic problem with charity and with humanitarian aid. So, but back to the article as I wrote it. I'm just scrolling down to where I left off. Oxfam was not the only humanitarian aid organization to be implicated in recent weeks. The Guardian wrote that Mercy Corps and other charities were also linked to that Haitian case, writing that a spokeswoman for Mercy Corps had confirmed the involvement of an individual who worked for Mercy Corps between July 2015 to November 2016. So what that means is that an individual mentioned in that 2011 Oxfam report later went on to work for this charity Mercy Corps in 2015 and 2016. 2016. So the European press reports noted that this was not the first time Mercy Corps, which is another aid group, had been associated with sex abuse accusations, writing that a similar but separate issue surfaced last year after Mercy Corps, which again is another EU-funded NGO, publicly announced that it was investigating allegations of sexual misconduct by two of its staff on the Greek island of Lesbos. Disputed Media previously reported on the involvement of Mercy Corps and other groups in Haiti in an article covering special interest-tied microfinance and reinsurance groups that used the devastating cholera outbreak caused by UN peacekeepers to profit. And this was absolutely ridiculous and disgusting as well in its own right. It's financial, leeching, its financial predation on the Haitian people in the wake of not only this earthquake, but then the cholera outbreak. So the piece noted, and referring to the Disputed Media article that we published last year, noted that groups who appear for all intents and purposes to be aimed at aiding Haitians actually reaped a sizable profit from the instigation of microloans and reinsurance programs, descending on the Haitian populace before even basic sanitation had been instigated. And so especially like Mercy Corps describes itself as an aid group, as a 501c aid group, and yet it is part of a group of micro lenders and reinsurance programs that actually are profit-seeking endeavors. So this is where you have this mire of predation under the guise of aid, and this is where so much more skepticism needs to be applied to these groups, whether it's financial, whether it's sex abuse and trafficking. There is all sorts of abuse that happens, and the Haitian people themselves, or the people in Chad, or whatever area it's in, whether it's Kosovo and the Balkans and during that war in the 90s, there is a fundamental lack of infrastructure those people to then turn to when you're in a war, or you're in the aftermath of an earthquake, or you're in the midst of a cholera epidemic. You can't go to your local law offices or your police station and say, hey, this charity isn't doing what it said it would do, or a host of other problems. There's no one to turn to. So the aid groups can operate with just near impunity, and unless somebody else that is from outside the country finds out what they're doing and stops them, or somebody, if by happenstance law in the country they're abusing says something speaks out against them, there's just not much that you can do. And so when you see stuff like Zoe's Ark, where 10,000 children were going to be taken from the country of Chad, if that had not been stopped, who would have said anything? So how much more of this happens that we don't know about? That's a really serious question that has not been addressed. So, but going back to Mercy Corps, this author's previous report explained that the microfinancers and reinsurers involved in Haiti in the wake of the 2010 earthquake and the secondary cholera epidemic included Swiss Re, Funcosi, and Mercy Corps, all of whom partnered with the Clinton Global Initiative to create the Microinsurance Catastrophe Risk Organization, or it goes by the acronym MICRO. So Mercy Corps is chaired by Linda A. Mason, who also co-founded Bright Horizons, a large childcare organization that has previously operated in Haiti with Mercy Corps. And that is a whole topic of investigation that needs to be taken further by my fellow independent media or citizen journalists. Please look into these organizations further, because I am betting that there will be more dirt to uncover with these groups. That's just my opinion. Linda Mason is somebody who has had Obama and Hillary Clinton in her house personally for fundraising events. So I think it's very, very interesting that she's also the head of Mercy Corps, and that Mercy Corps has been engaging in this aid and also profiting from microinsurance, reinsurance, and this financing that is profit seeking. So, despite describing itself as a tax-exempt 501c charity, Mercy Corps, as I said, runs a microfinance portfolio including 1,351,511 dispersed loans worldwide, worth over $1.4 billion, with total assets worth $453.3 million. And this is all US dollars. It seems remarkable that a tax-exempt charity would also found a number of banks as well, including the Bank Andara, Asian Credit Fund, the Agency for Finance in Kosovo, IMON International Companion Financial Group LLC, Partner Microcredit Organization, Zach Bank, and Mercy Corps Northwest. And these are scattered across the entire planet. They're in very remote areas, a lot of these banks. So Mercy Corps' founding role in banking institutions and engagement in micro-lending may seem like a digression from the core issues described in this article, like the Oxfam sexual abuse scandal. However, the charity's involvement with for-profit microfinance operations and the founding of numerous banks as a 501c charity raises serious questions regarding the potential of financial predation, as I was ranting about earlier, by NGOs against the most vulnerable in the most vulnerable situations. So microfinance has been linked to the suicide of dozens of farmers in India, with local press reports describing microfinance as, quote, no better than money lenders who have so far been able to operate under the pious garb of poverty eradication and poverty eradicators. And that's the end of the quote. But the accusation appears to be borne out in reality, with interest rates on these tiny loans often skyrocketing above the advertised 10% flat rate, reaching as high as 40%. So these are the poorest and the most these are people that are in emergency situations, and they're coming in and charging them these massive interest rates. And I think it's scandalous. I think the word evil can be applied here. And Indian press reports, because this is also something that happens in India, they report that the consequences are a final rate of 24 to 30% or even higher for the poor who can barely afford a square meal a day. So these are the people that don't have money to begin with, and then they are being leeched for the last cent they have by friends of, very wealthy individuals. So this is for profit. This is absolutely abusing the poorest people on earth globally, and this is a really, really big problem. This accusation also, and I skipped a paragraph, but masked in the guise of aid, parasitic aid groups are converting populations in severe distress into a new market of debt slaves and earning massive tax-exempt profit in that bargain. This new vampirism has even has a feel-good label. It's called financial inclusion. In some cases, press reports indicate that poverty-stricken farmers have resorted to selling their organs to pay off mounting debts, with Business Insider describing the issue. Quote, reports of usurious interest rates being charged to desperate borrowers came to light amidst mounting criticism of the high-handed tactics employed by loan officers to collect monthly installments. Collective defaults by entire villages were reported around the world, most disturbingly in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh, a hotbed of microfinance lending. Dozens of suicides occurred among the borrowers under pressure from large micro-lenders, forcing the state to clamp down on the exorbitant interest rates. Recent studies have found microfinance to have had zero impact on poverty alleviation. So they are quite literally, in a financial sense, coming in and advertising themselves as aid, as somebody, as groups that are alleviating poverty, and instead they are literally predating on these people. It's evil. But anyway, additional press reports have gone so far as to pose the question, quote, is microfinance pushing the world's poorest even deeper into poverty? In other words, much like the sexual abuses revealed to have taken place at the hands of Oxfam staff in Haiti, charitable organizations also take financial advantage of vulnerable populations. And this is a crucial point that I'm repeating in this article for a reason, because it removes the smiling veneer from humanitarian work, exposing it as opportunism of the worst sort. And so what I'm trying to get across here is that when you see humanitarian aid groups advertising to you on cable TV to go, donate to them, look at them with the highest skepticism. I mean, the most skepticism you would apply to any group that you don't trust, okay? You need to apply that to charities across the board, because this is what is exposed again and again and again. And it's not. So in that sense, it's not just predating on these people in these impoverished situations. It's also taking the money of well-meaning people in the US and in Western countries who want to help these, populations that are in distress. So adding to all of this, Disobedient Media previously reported that former French Foreign Minister Bernard Kouchnier's role as the head of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, which goes by the acronym UNMIK, as well as as founder of the charity Doctors Without Borders. And I misspoke, he was a co-founder with Doctors Without Borders. But Kouchner straddled the dual roles in the United Nations as well as a charity. So he was working for the United Nations, and then he also co-founded a charity, so he's juggling these two roles. It makes him particularly relevant to this issue of, United Nations and charity being involved with allegations of abuse, especially in light of his ardent defense of convicted pedophile Michael Sunele. So Sunele had served with Kouchnier's organization, Doctors Without Borders, after serving part of a lengthy prison sentence for armed robbery, participating in humanitarian efforts in locations including Rwanda, where he looked for survivors of the families of 200 orphans. Sunele organized the placement of these children and photographed them. French press actually described Sunele appearing to have spoken to them about having a crush on the children that he photographed. And this is the guy that was later convicted of pedophilia. So remarkably, instead of condemning Sunele after these allegations of child sex abuse emerged, Kouchner actually staunchly defended Sunele in court. So he had Kouchner had previously gone so far as to call Sunele's work a model for international humanitarian bodies. That such a prominent figure in the United Nations, French politics and charity work would praise a pedophile and convicted armed robber as a model for humanitarian aid speaks to an endemic culture of abuse in these aid organizations. So, and then I have another article from the Daily Express from 1988, and it's an image of that press clipping, and I'm going to read that article to you because it gives more context to this whole issue. And this is a clipping that also relates to the UNICEF scandal that the previous clipping I read to you also addressed. So it's titled "Child Charity Boss is Accused," and it reads, quote, "A former director of the children's fund UNICEF appeared in court yesterday accused of running a pornography racket. The racket involving child sex stretched to 18 countries, including Britain, and had more than 500 members. Ex-fund director Robert Verbeek was charged in Brussels with 13 men and women. When police raided the Belgian headquarters of UNICEF, they found pieces of obscene photographs and clothes, including cowboy suits in which children were dressed for sex games. They also discovered a contact list of pedophiles in Europe and America. The defendants include parents who offered their children for sex with adults." And then there's another article on this from the New York Times that talks about the issue of trafficking from North Africa. So simultaneous, and that's the end of that clipping, but simultaneous with the ongoing Oxfam debacle, press reports also indicate that former UNICEF consultant Peter Newell was recently admitted to 5 indecent and serious sexual assaults on a child under 16 and was sentenced to 6 years, 8 months in prison. BBC explained that Newell is also the former coordinator for the Association for the Protection of All Children, and that in 2007 he co-authored the implementation handbook for the Convention on the Rights of the Child for UNICEF. So this is not the first time, obviously, that UNICEF has been tied to sexual abuse of children, and Disobedient Media previously reported on that infamous scandal that unfolded in the 1980s, in which the operation of a child porn and child trafficking operation was discovered to have been run from the basement of the UNICEF building in Brussels. And members of the establishment were charged in association with the abuses, including the unnamed individual with purported ties to the intelligence community and his work on anti-terrorist legislation. So a report from the Guardian, published in 1987, which I read to you at the beginning of this article, indicated that director of the National Committee for UNICEF was charged with offences involving what police suspected was an international child prostitution ring. And then I have a block quote from the article that I read to you, so I won't read it to you again because this is already a lengthy video, but ultimately 13 individuals were arrested in connection with that scandal. Of particular note, as I have said, was the relationship between that UNICEF ring and the previously mentioned government official who was described as working on that anti-terror legislation. The Glasgow Herald also described the same network. writing, quote, "A Belgian professor who was involved in a worldwide child pornography scandal has hanged himself in prison. Professor Mulatin was connected with a vast ring of pedophiles in Europe, America, Japan, and Africa. They were supplied from Brussels with photographs of children engaged in sexual acts with adults. Some were taken in the basement." So these acts took place in the basement of the Brussels UNICEF building. And police have arrested Michael Fellow, 45, etc., etc. And that's the end of that quote from the Glasgow Herald. The New York Times also reported, as I've mentioned like 3 times, the 1987 Brussels outrage, publishing an article titled "Child Sex Scandal Royals UNICEF Unit." The outlet wrote, and this is a quote from the New York Times that was published at the time that the scandal took place. They wrote, quote, "UNICEF said it was investigating charges that the Belgian committee was linked to an organization producing pornographic photographs of children and distributing them throughout Europe." And I'm going to actually open up that article because I want to check to make sure that the mention of trafficking from North Africa took place in that article. Yeah, okay, so this is from the New York Times. This is not in the article that I'm reading to you, but I want to read this to you anyway. It says, the scandal erupted when, Jos Verbeek, who we've heard about before, was charged with inciting minors to debauchery, but the arrest followed the discovery of a secret photographic studio in the basement of the Brussels UNICEF building where the committee's offices are housed. The studio was used to take pornographic photographs of children, many of whom were of North African origin, the police said. And then it talks about the allegations that this was a trafficking organization. Yeah. So that is from the New York Times in June 1987. The link to this article is in the article by Dispute Media, and I will link this to you in the description of this video. But adding to the grotesque image of non-governmental organizations is the previously reported testimony of Greg Bucciaroni to Disobedient Media. Greg described in detail the harmful role played by philanthropic organizations in Philadelphia during the 1970s and 1980s. This is not just a third world country issue. This is definitely a US issue as well. He recounted the methods by which multiple organizations were used by well-connected pedophiles to access vulnerable youth under the guise of helping them. Instead of providing a haven for troubled youth, such organizations provided easy access to predators who could then abuse children without consequence. The sexual abuse of children and adults by apparently respectable, charitable, and non-governmental groups is a long-standing issue. Clearly, as this long article has described in detail, and one that stretches back decades. Part of the blame for this pervasive lack of oversight lays at the feet of an amnesiac press that fails to connect such successive scandals to a poisonous tolerance of abuse among aid groups, NGOs, and the United Nations. The most recent abuses of Oxfam and Newell of UNICEF represent a decades-old trend that appears doomed to repeat itself unless substantial action is taken to make sure that such organizations are accountable to the public. Aid groups can no longer be approached as universally positive affairs and must be analyzed with as much skepticism as applies to any group that interferes with the population of a sovereign nation. Under the banner of aid, the worst varieties of postmodern colonialism, child abuse, and even human trafficking are too easily ignored or excused. Unless fundamental changes are made, a terminal lack of transparency combined with the massive power imbalance in aid work will lead to endless repetitions of financial and sexual abuses by members of charities that take advantage of the most vulnerable under the cover of chaos. And that is the end of the article, and I hope that you will be inspired to go research this yourself and really truly apply skepticism to any donation you make to any charity and to all charities in general. And I hope that some of you will see that aid work or United Nations peacekeeping and all of these issues are in many ways the worst type of postmodern colonialism and abuse literally under the guise of helping people. And it is a horrible variety of globalism and a horrible variety of postmodern colonialism. And not enough is said about this by legacy media. Not enough is said about this by independent media. And that's why I will rant and rave about it repeatedly, because it needs to be said. So with all of that out of the way, thank you so much for listening. I know this is a long video. I know I've ranted a bit and it's a lengthy article in the first place, but it is a topic that is very, very important to me, and it is one that is not covered enough. So with all of that said, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'm always happy to read your comments, whether it's about the audio not being good or anything else. Thank you all for your feedback. And you can find me on Twitter at Elizabeth, Leavos. You can find Disobedient Media on Twitter at Disobedient News. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Steemit. I prefer you use Steemit than Facebook, but we're there. And I will see you next time. The next article I'm planning on reading to you all will be the one on Sarkozy, and that's why I wanted to get this out of the way, to provide context for the information in that article. So thank you again, and I'll see you next time.